85 murders a day in South Africa. That was recorded between October and December 2023. Last week, the police ministry announcing quarterly crime statistics: 7,710 murder cases between October and December. It's a 2.1% increase from the 7,555 unnatural deaths in South Africa during the same period compared to 2022. A slight decrease when it comes to reported sexual offences, went down from 15,284 to 15,545 cases compared to the third quarter of 2022. But when these cases are investigated, they need to go through a process of collecting data, collecting evidence, and collecting forensic evidence. One of the major stumbling blocks when it comes to our justice system is the slow pace at which forensics and DNA testing is done. But also last week, Bheki Cele says that they've caught up with all the testing and the backlog, and that's been reduced to near zero, he said. He said that the backlog had been reduced by 99.3% when it comes to backlogs at forensic pathology labs. Dr. Vanessa Lynch is the regional director for DNA for Africa. Is the police minister correct that they've nearly brought that backlog of DNA testings to zero at our forensic pathology labs? Vanessa, good morning.
Morning, Lester. It's highly unlikely. The narratives change, and there's not a lot of transparency. I think it was far back as 2019, there was a figure of around 250,000, probably slightly more, that was ring-fenced. And they've just simply been saying that that figure has been reduced, which may be so, but they're not accounting for all the cases that have been accumulating since that time. And there's, from what I've heard, there are a lot of stumbling blocks that would never really amount to a zero backlog. I mean, even the most efficient labs in the world don't have a zero backlog. So how South Africa thinks that that's possible, it's not correct. No.
Last year in August, there was the opening of the new DNA lab in Gqeberha. Police Ministry says that this has greatly impacted on this backlog. He says, for example, the NPA and SAPS project has led to more than 40,000 DNA forensics reports being finalized to ensure that cases of gender-based violence are prioritized.
Again, you see, the thing is that every time there's a statement that's being made, there's literally nothing to back it up. There's no transparency. And whilst they've made progress with regards to opening a new lab, which is great, as far as I understand, it's not fully functioning because the tenders that have been awarded, I think it was in March last year, haven't been fully realized because they're still in the process of validation. Now, that means that both that laboratory and the other two laboratories are still not in operating at full capacity until such time as all of those tenders are realized. So it's all about transparency. If they were able to share, for instance, how many cases are being received, how many are registered, how many of those are being processed in any given month, and how many of those are being finalized. At the same time, how many profiles have been loaded onto the database. We would be able to see, well, are the amounts that they're talking about correct? But they're not willing to do that. There's lots of software around the world where you're able to literally track from the time, let's say, a sexual assault is reported at the health department or at a TCC center, up to the time that evidence is collected and delivered to the forensic laboratory, processed, loaded onto the database, and then actually finalized by the NPA. You're not going to get a zero backlog. You're not going to get a perfect score. But in a way, I think South Africans would prefer to know the truth, even if it might not be the best result ever. To see that something is being done is a good thing. But unfortunately, the narrative, as I say, is that everything is fine, when in fact it's not. Because if you ask the NPA, there are still women who are waiting for their cases after years and years because it hasn't been processed timelessly. So whilst we're moving in the right direction, I think what we should be calling for is more transparency to see where are the issues and what can we do to help intervene. Do we need more private laboratories? Do we need more capacity? Should they be moving faster with regard to implementing the tenders that have been awarded? Those are the questions we should be asking.
7,710 murder cases reported between October and December 2023. With the slow collection and processing of forensic and DNA evidence, Vanessa, how many of these cases actually lead to prosecution and then lead to a conviction? I remember 2020, there was a report that said that less than 20% of murder investigations in South Africa actually result in trial dates being set. The backlogs at forensic pathology labs is having a devastating impact on our overall justice system.
Look, pathology is completely different. It's Department of Health, and DNA is SAPS. So they are beset with different issues, and we mustn't confuse the two. And if you're talking straight DNA results, if and in the event of a murder case that has been collected, DNA is not the only evidence. So again, if there was some form of transparency with regards to where we're at with the process, then we'd be able to answer these questions more readily. But figures are just thrown at us, and it's really difficult to decipher, where the truth lies. Having a DNA database, however, really does have a wonderful, the effect of that is that you can link serial offenders who may be connected to more than one crime. And often in those cases, we've seen that a lot of them don't even need to go to trial because it results in a guilty plea, and they negotiate a sentence thereafter. So, we mustn't think that just because a case hasn't gone to trial, that it hasn't resulted in some kind of resolution. But if we were able to see maybe, how many of those resulted in a guilty plea, for instance, how many of those are outstanding, how many of those are linked to serial offenders, that would probably give us more insight into the state of our justice system.
Really appreciate your time, Dr. Vanessa Lynch, Regional Director at the DNA for Africa project.